Welcome to the sixth tutorial in the Introduction to Programming using Python. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at Python lists. In programming, we're often dealing with data. And so programming languages offer several types of data structures to allow us to organize and manage the data we're dealing with. A sequence is one of these data structures. A sequence is an ordered collection of pieces of data. And Python has several types of sequences. You'll recall previously that we said a string is a sequence of characters. They also have tuples, buffers, range, and lists. We're going to run into the range sequence later in this tutorial, but for now let's start with lists. Like we said, a list is a sequence. It's an ordered collection of items. Usually we use lists for collections of related items, such as your sibling names or the courses you're taking. Now, in idle, let's go and take a look at lists. If you wanted to define variable courses to be a list, all you have to do is courses equals empty square brackets. That will give you an empty list. And if you wanted to define your courses list, but you wanted to initialize, that is, if you wanted to create a list with the items ready, you can create the square brackets, and inside the square brackets, you can list the items that you want to go in that list. So basically, let's say we go English, comma, science, comma, math. So here I have listed 3 items separated by comma inside of the square brackets. And now if I go enter, I have a list of 3 items. Now, this is fine if you know the items that you're dealing with to begin with. So if I already know what courses I'm taking, I can create the list with those courses. But what if I add something later? So let's say I have a list of my courses and I'm going to want to add another one. So in this case, I go courses dot append, and I use the append function, and I add the new item that I want to go in the list. And now if I type courses, I will see that I now have a list of 4 items. Now we haven't seen something like this before. We haven't seen a function that's called by basically typing the variable name dot and the function name. We have seen the print and the int functions, which work by listing the function name like print and by basically giving that function the argument or the parameter I wanted to deal with. So I would go print something to print. I wouldn't go something to print dot print. I wouldn't go string dot print. Okay, so these are different types of functions. They're basically functions that work on types. So unlike the functions we have seen, the append function only works on variables of type list. They're basically called type methods, and this is something we're going to look at in details when we get to the object-oriented segment of this tutorial series. For now, I just wanted you to know that there are functions that only work if you use them on a variable of a particular type. And this append function is one of them. So if you have a variable of type list, you can go that variable name dot append, and you can give it as an argument the item you want to add. And the result would be the fact that, like we've seen, the courses list has been appended to it, has been added that item. So this append function wouldn't work if you use it on a variable of some other type. So let's say we had something, we had a string, let's say a name. I can't just go name dot append because append is only defined for variables of type list. Similarly, there are functions that are defined for variables of type string that wouldn't work on the list. So let's say name as an example, which happens to be a string. I can go dot upper, and it would uppercase it and give me that name in uppercase. If I went to my courses and tried that, it wouldn't work. Again, this is something we will look at in details later when we get to classes and object-oriented programming. For now, I just wanted you to know the difference between these and the functions we have seen. But back onto the lists. So this is how we define a list, and we know that we can use the append function to add to a list. Now remember that we said the list is ordered. This doesn't mean sorted, it just means ordered. As in, if you put an item in the second position in the list, it will remain at that position, and you can access that element in the list by its position later. So going back into idle, let's redefine the list of courses we were taking. We said we're going to take English math, science, and, of course, programming, you'll see that Python keeps the same order that you have entered. And now, each element in the list has an index. And if we use the index and we ask the list to give me the element at that index, we should get it. And the way that works in Python is courses, the list variable name, followed by square brackets. Inside the square brackets, you put the index, the position of the item that you want. So let's say we wanted the first element in that list. Would be tempted to say courses at index 1. But instead of getting English, which is the first element, we would get math, which is the second element. And the reason for that is most programming languages, including Python, use an index that starts at 0. So basically the first element is at index 0, the second element is at index 1, and the last element, let's say if you had 4, as in this example, the last element would be at index 3. So courses at index 0 would be English, and courses at index 3 would be the last element, the fourth element, programming. The interesting thing with Python is it allows you to actually use negative indexes to start from the end of the list. So if you wanted the last element, even if you didn't know the length of that list, you would go -1, and that would give you the last element in the list. -4, in this case, would be the first element. Obviously, since you already used 0 for the first element, you couldn't use -0 for the last element because that just wouldn't work. Now, if you put an index that is not available in the list, so we only have 4 elements, which means index 3 is the last positive index. If we put 4 or anything more than that, Python would complain saying index out of range because the range is 0 to 3. Same thing with the negative numbers. We have -1 to -4. If I put -5 or less, it would complain. Now we can use the index not only to pick that item from the list, but also to reassign it. So if I put courses at index 0 and I hit enter, it says English. But if I go courses at index 0 equals, let's say I change it to geography, now I can see that my 4 elements have changed from English, math, science, and programming to geography, math, science, and programming. English is completely gone out of the list. The item that was at position 0 is now geography. Now, if I wanted to remove an item, there are 2 ways to remove items from a list. One using the actual index, one using the item itself. So if I know the item I want to remove, I can go courses.remove. Similar to the append, I can use the remove function. And similar to the append, remove function would only work on variables of type list. So let's say I remove math. Now my courses has geography, science, and programming. Math is gone. If I want to remove an item using its index, then I can go use the delete keyword, del, D-E-L, courses at the index that I want to remove. And delete has to be used this way, del space, the variable name for that list, and then square brackets and the position that I want. And if I look at courses, it has now changed. The item that used to be at index 0 is gone. And the item that is now at index 0 is the item that was at index 1. The item that was at index 2 before is now at index 1, and so on. With lists, I can do more than we just saw. We can add lists. So if I had 2 lists, let's say I had another list, my courses for next year, or maybe the programming courses that I'm going to take in the future. Let's say Python and Java, another programming language. I can combine those. I can go courses plus courses 2, and it would give me a new list with all the elements from the first list and then all the elements from the second list in that order. And obviously I can assign those to a new list variable. Okay, now one more thing is lists do not ensure that the items are unique. So my combined list includes science, programming, Python, and Java. I can go combined list.append Python, and it will not complain because you're allowed to have duplicate items in the list. But if I wanted to check before adding if that item already exists, then I can use the in conditional operator. And in Python, how that works is you put the item that you want to check, let's say Python, in the list you want it to check against. And this, like other conditional operators, would give you true if the item is in that list, or false otherwise. And we can use that in if conditional statements. Also, if we have a list, just like the list we've been creating, and we don't necessarily know how big that list is. So let's say we start with a list of 0 or whatever length it happened to be, and then other items get added or removed. You can always use the length len function. This is a built-in function that works on any collection. So a list is a collection. So I can go courses, and it gives me 2. Combined list, and it gives me 5. And we can use this length for other purposes. So if I wanted to limit the size of the list, if let's say you were adding courses and the university or the school only allows you to take 4 courses per semester, it says, hold on, you're already at 5 or you're already at 4, and I want to allow you to add it. So this is another useful operator that we can use. So the exercise for this tutorial is to build a program that will prompt a user to enter 4 courses. It will say enter your first course, second, third, fourth course. Put those 4 courses in a list and then print that list. You say your course list is, and print the list. And then you will prompt the user, do you wish to change any of the courses? If the user answers yes, you will say which course number do you want to change, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then you will say what's the new course name that you're taking, and then you print the new list. If the user answers no, you say your course list did not change. Now, let me show you a couple of things that you will need for the exercise. First of all, we've seen the print function so far where we only pass one argument. And remember that I said when you call a function, you could pass multiple arguments if that function would accept it. So we've seen something like this. But the print function actually can take multiple arguments. So you can say some string, comma, second string. And when you pass it multiple arguments, it will even put a space between them. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I'd like you to print the label that you want to say, your course list is, and then after that, the list itself. And I'll show you that in a second. Also, when we were defining lists in our tutorial, we were dealing with appending and using strings directly, like this. But if I had a variable that was a string, I can do the same thing to it. So I can append C1 because C1 is a string. Same thing is when I'm defining it. So whether I use the string English directly or C1, which is a string, it will work the same. And now I can say print your course list is, and it will print it. Okay, so this is what I would like you to do. And now let's run the program and see what the output will look like. So once you run the program that you will write, it will say enter your first course, your second, and then it says your course list is English, Math, Programming, Science. Do you wish to change one of your courses? You will say, if you say yes, it will say enter the course number you want to change. Now notice we're asking the user to enter 1, 2, 3, or 4 because you can't assume that the user of your program will be a programmer. So you can't tell them enter 0, 1, 2, or 3. They don't have to know that in Python the indexes start at 0. So what you have to do is you have to read the integer and then subtract 1 from it. So let's say I enter 2. It says enter the new course name that you would like to take, and then I will go Here's the new course that I would like to take. And it will say your new course list is, and now math has been replaced with geography. Now, if I were to run the program and say no, it will say your course list did not change. Now, you can assume for your program that the user will enter yes or no properly with capitals because that's what you will have to check for. And you can assume that when you say, which course do you want to change, 1, 2, 3, or 4, they will enter 1, 2, 3, or 4. But for a bonus, if you would like, you can check for errors. You can check if the user enters something that is less than 1 or more than 4, and you can tell them that, you know what, you don't have a course with that index. So this is a bonus if you would like. You can also accept things like yes, y, and no, 1 or 0, 1 being true, 0 being false. That's up to you. But for the basic one, all you have to do is accept yes or no with a capital Y and a capital N. So hopefully you'll try that, and a solution to this exercise, as usual, will be linked to from the description of the video. Next time, we're going to be looking at Python maps or dictionaries.